It always starts the same way. A friendly wave across the street. A soft laugh over coffee. A neighbor who helps you carry groceries up the stairs. And then, one day, they're gone. Not just gone, taken. And the smiling face you once trusted is suddenly plastered across every news channel as a killer. We like to believe we can see evil when it walks among us. That monsters look like monsters. But reality is far more chilling. The most dangerous predators are the ones who look just like us, perhaps better. More charming. More convincing. Take, for instance, Ted Bundy. By day, he was handsome, polite, intelligent, a law student with political ambitions. By night, he was a sadistic murderer who left a trail of bodies across multiple states. Bundy's victims trusted him. They pitied him when he pretended to be injured, asking for help to load something into his car. They got close enough to touch him, and that's when their lives ended. I don't feel guilty for anything. I feel sorry for people who feel guilt, Bundy once said, his voice steady, almost amused. Now, pause for a moment. Consider that statement. No tremor. No hesitation. Just cold certainty. How do you recognize a killer who believes they've done nothing wrong? Bundy wasn't an outlier. John Wayne Gacy was the friendly local contractor, even dressing up as Pogo the Clown to entertain children. Behind his suburban home, under the floorboards, police would eventually discover the bodies of 33 young men. Dennis Rader, known as BTK, bind, torture, kill, was a church president and a father. He attended community meetings, smiled in family photos, and led a double life so flawlessly that for decades, no one suspected the horror he concealed. Think about that. The man who held a hymn book on Sunday might have spent Saturday night binding, torturing, and killing in someone's basement. What's most unsettling isn't just what these men did, it's how long they got away with it. Because predators like these wear masks. Not literal masks, but the kind made of ordinary gestures and fabricated kindness. They study people. They mirror back what you want to see. And in that reflection, you let your guard down. Imagine shaking hands with someone capable of tearing you apart. Imagine laughing at a joke told by a man who buried someone just hours earlier. This is why their stories haunt us. Because if evil can smile, how can we ever be sure we're safe? As night deepens and the world grows quiet, I want you to picture this. The next time you walk past a stranger in the dark on a lonely street, in an empty parking lot, ask yourself, what do I really know about them? Would you still smile back, if you knew? And yet, these smiling monsters didn't just exist, they thrived. Which leads to an even darker truth. We helped them. It begins with whispers. A local paper reports a missing girl. A small headline, buried beneath weather updates and city council debates. Hardly anyone notices. Then, another girl disappears. And another. Soon, the whispers turn to screams. By the time the story reaches national headlines, it's no longer about the victims. It's about him. The public can't look away. They devour every detail, his face, his methods, his twisted motives. Reporters crowd into small town streets. Cameras flash as detectives push through crime scenes. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the killer becomes a celebrity. This is the dark symbiosis between killers and the media. Consider Jack the Ripper, one of history's first modern media sensations. In 1888, London's newspapers splashed gruesome details across their pages, turning a faceless murderer into an enduring legend. The press gave him his name. They printed his alleged letters, some possibly fakes, feeding a frenzy that captivated the public. Over a century later, the pattern hasn't changed. When Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested in 1991, headlines branded him the Milwaukee Cannibal. People couldn't get enough. Documentaries, interviews, even reenactments followed. In court, spectators lined up for seats as if attending a Broadway show. And the killers, they notice. They always notice. Dennis Rader, BTK, once sent a letter to police complaining that they weren't giving him enough attention. "How many people do I have to kill," he wrote, "before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" Let that sink in. A man tortured and murdered human beings, then whined about not getting enough credit. But it's not just the killers feeding on fame, it's us. The public. We buy the books. Watch the interviews. Stream the shows. We turn these monsters into myths. Why? Perhaps we think learning about them keeps us safe, that knowledge is protection. Or maybe, deep down, we're drawn to the darkness because it reflects something uncomfortable about ourselves. There's also power in fear. The media knows it. Fear sells. And killers, whether consciously or not, become the product. Imagine being a grieving parent, turning on the TV, and seeing your child's murderer smiling back from the screen, immortalized by endless coverage. This transformation, from man to myth, is dangerous. Because while we're staring at one monster in the spotlight, another is out there, waiting. And here's the cruelest twist of all. Sometimes, the very attention we give these killers inspires the next one. Copycats. Admirers. A new generation of predators learning from those who came before. It's a cycle as old as the first blood-stained headline. And like all cycles, it has a beginning. What creates a killer in the first place? Where do these shadows come from? To understand that, we must step back into childhood bedrooms filled with secrets, homes where screams went unheard, and minds that began to fracture long before the first crime. Monsters are not born in the dark. They are shaped by it. Behind every notorious killer lies a story, a childhood photo, a family home, a moment when innocence began to rot. To understand how a human being becomes a predator, we have to go back to where it all began. Consider Ed Kemper, known as the co-ed killer. At first glance, he seems like the textbook serial murderer, towering, intimidating, brutal. But listen to his childhood, and a different picture emerges. His mother reportedly locked him in a dark basement for hours at a time, telling him she feared he would harm his sisters. She berated him, humiliated him, told him no woman would ever love him. By the age of 15, Ed Kemper had murdered his grandparents. Later, he admitted, "I just wanted to see what it felt like." Was that the moment the switch flipped? Or had it been flipping, bit by bit, all along? Many killers share similar histories: abuse, neglect, trauma. Eileen Wuornos, one of the few female serial killers in modern history, was abandoned by her mother and sexually abused by her grandfather. She grew up in a world that taught her early on that life was violence, that love was pain. In interviews, she often spoke of betrayal, of never feeling safe. But here's the question that keeps psychologists up at night. Does trauma create a killer, or simply awaken what was already there? Some argue there's something deeper, something innate. Take Jeffrey Dahmer. His childhood wasn't marked by extreme abuse. Yes, his parents had a turbulent marriage, but many children endure that without becoming cannibals. And yet, Dahmer spoke of feeling different from an early age. By adolescence, he fantasized about controlling and possessing people completely. It's as though, for some, the darkness is waiting, silent, patient, until the right conditions let it bloom. This interplay of nature and nurture is what makes the making of a monster so terrifying. Because if it's only trauma, we can comfort ourselves by saying, "It couldn't happen to me or my children." But if there's something more, something that can lurk in anyone, dormant until it isn't, what then? Neurologists have even found brain abnormalities in certain killers, differences in the amygdala, the part of the brain that regulates fear and empathy. Reduced activity in these areas suggests a biological inability to feel what we feel. Imagine living without empathy, without remorse, without guilt. Now consider how that person looks from the outside. They smile. They laugh. They hold jobs, relationships, secrets. And one day, they decide to act. The making of a monster isn't a single moment. It's a process. A slow erosion of boundaries, a rehearsing of fantasies, a growing hunger that can't be sated. And when that hunger finally spills over into reality, the world meets them not as the broken child they once were, but as the nightmare they've become. Which raises the next question. Once they've crossed that line, how do we find them? How do we stop someone who kills not in anger, but in cold, deliberate calculation? The answer lies in a dangerous game of cat and mouse. A game where one wrong move costs lives. By the time the world realizes a predator is among us, it's often too late. Bodies have already been buried. Families shattered. A pattern begins to emerge only in hindsight, dots connected by investigators racing against a clock they can't see. Catching a serial killer isn't like catching a thief or a mugger. These predators don't strike once and vanish. They hunt. Carefully. Patiently. They choose their victims, study their routines, plan their crimes like surgeons preparing for an operation. Consider Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. For nearly 2 decades, he murdered women around Seattle. Police found bodies in clusters, dumped like discarded trash near the Green River. Despite multiple interrogations over the years, Ridgway always slipped away. He blended into the background, working quietly at a truck painting company, going home to his wife each night as though nothing were wrong. Why did it take so long to catch him? Because he didn't look like a killer. And because, in the early days, law enforcement lacked the tools to see the invisible threads linking his crimes. The hunt for a serial killer is part science, part intuition, and part sheer obsession. Investigators often speak of sleepless nights, of faces that haunt them, of the crushing weight of knowing the killer is still out there, striking again while they search. Take Robert Ressler, one of the FBI agents who pioneered criminal profiling in the 1970s. He sat across from men like Ed Kemper and John Wayne Gacy, dissecting their minds to predict how other killers might behave. Ressler coined the term serial killer itself. His work revealed chilling truths. These predators follow patterns. They escalate. They can be hunted, but only if you understand how they think. Still, even with profiling, killers sometimes taunt authorities, staying one step ahead. The BTK killer, Dennis Rader, eluded capture for over 30 years. He sent cryptic letters to the police, bragging about his crimes, manipulating investigators like pieces on a chessboard. It wasn't until he made one arrogant mistake, sending a floppy disk traced back to his church, that he was finally caught. But what about those who never make mistakes? Israel Keyes was one of them. A meticulous, methodical killer who buried kill kits across the country, guns, duct tape, rope, so he could strike wherever and whenever he wanted. He picked victims at random, leaving almost no trace. The FBI has called him one of the most terrifying killers they've ever studied. And yet, he might have gone completely undetected if not for a single abduction that went wrong. This is the grim truth of the hunt. For every killer we catch, there may be others we never even know about. They disappear into the crowd, their secrets hidden in plain sight. And that brings us to the most unsettling part of this story, stepping inside their minds to understand why. Why they do what they do. Why the killing never stops. Why, for some, death itself isn't enough. To truly grasp the darkness we're dealing with, we must enter the very place we fear the most, the mind of a serial killer. What drives someone to kill again and again? To take life not in passion, not in rage, but with calculated pleasure. To understand this, we must strip away the mask and stare into the void beneath. When interviewed in prison, Ted Bundy once said, "We serial killers are your sons, we are your husbands, we are everywhere. And there will be more of your children dead tomorrow." He wasn't boasting. He was warning. For many serial killers, murder isn't about death, it's about control. The act of playing God. Of holding the power of life and death in their hands and savoring it. Consider Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. In court, when he described binding, torturing, and killing his victims, he spoke as though recounting a grocery list. No emotion. No remorse. Just a quiet satisfaction in explaining how he outsmarted everyone for decades. This absence of empathy is almost universal among serial killers. Psychologists classify many of them as psychopaths or sociopaths, individuals who lack conscience, guilt, or emotional connection. To them, people aren't people. They're objects. Tools. Playthings. Jeffrey Dahmer admitted that his killings were attempts to create zombies, men who could never leave him, never reject him. He drilled into skulls, poured acid into brains, trying to make living dolls. When asked why, he said, "I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them. I tried to live out these fantasies." Others kill for the thrill itself. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, broke into homes, murdered strangers, and left satanic symbols behind. When sentenced to death, he smirked and said, Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland. What do you feel when you hear that? Disgust? Anger? Fear? For them, that's the point. To make you feel powerless. To remind you that they are outside your rules, beyond your morality. But perhaps the most chilling realization is this: many of them know exactly what they are. Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer, was astonishingly self-aware. In interviews, he described his compulsion like an addiction. It was an urge. You're like an alcoholic. You can't stop. You're hooked. And you do things that are outrageous. And once it starts, there's no stopping. Imagine living in a world where someone's addiction is human life. This insight forces us to confront an unbearable question: can such people ever truly be stopped? Or are we simply waiting for them to make a mistake? Because for every killer we catch, another walks free. For every name we know, there are those we'll never hear, predators whose victims remain missing, whose crimes were never linked, whose faces could pass us on the street today. And some of those faces belong to people who were never caught, people who might still be out there. Some stories end with a courtroom verdict, a prison cell, or a lethal injection. But others end with nothing at all. Some killers simply vanish, leaving behind only questions, bodies, and shadows. Consider the case of the Zodiac Killer. In the late 1960s, he terrorized Northern California, sending cryptic letters and ciphers to newspapers, taunting police with details only the killer could know. He claimed to have murdered dozens, though only a handful of cases were ever confirmed. Despite decades of investigation, multiple suspects, and countless theories, his identity remains a mystery. Even now, over half a century later, people wonder if the Zodiac lived an ordinary life after the killings, shopping for groceries, raising a family, maybe even sitting beside someone on a park bench, as if nothing had ever happened. Then there's the Long Island serial killer, Lisk, a predator who dumped the remains of multiple victims along Gilgo Beach, New York. 4 years, the case went cold, despite the discovery of numerous bodies. It wasn't until 2023 that a suspect was finally arrested. But for over a decade, he walked free. Invisible. Untouched. And these are just the ones we know about. The FBI estimates that hundreds of active serial killers may exist in the United States alone at any given time. Think about that. Right now, at this very moment, someone may be planning their next attack. Someone may be digging a shallow grave. Someone may be smiling politely at a neighbor, hiding their true nature beneath the veneer of normalcy. What makes this reality so terrifying is how easy it is to disappear in plain sight. Modern technology has given us surveillance cameras, DNA testing, and digital footprints, but it has also given predators new tools. Anonymous online forums, dark web marketplaces, entire communities where killers share methods, fantasies, encouragement. And even when authorities close in, sometimes justice slips through their fingers. Israel Keyes killed across the United States for years. He admitted to crimes that authorities may never fully uncover. When finally captured, he took his own life in jail, taking his secrets with him. Somewhere, perhaps, lie his undiscovered victims, their families doomed to endless waiting, never knowing what happened. That's the true horror of the ones who got away, the silence they leave behind. No answers. No closure. Just the chilling possibility that the person walking behind you in a dimly lit parking lot might be one of them. So, we ask ourselves, why do we keep listening to these stories? Why do we press play on documentaries, podcasts, and late-night videos like this one? What draws us to the darkness, knowing it can consume us? The answer might be more unsettling than the killers themselves. You're still here. After everything you've heard, after the stories of torture, death, and vanished lives, you're still listening. Why? That question haunts us almost as much as the killers themselves. Psychologists have long debated why humans are drawn to true crime. Some say it's survival instinct, a way to learn what to fear, to study danger so we can avoid it. Others argue it's about control. In a world where violence can erupt without warning, consuming these stories from a safe distance gives us the illusion of power. But there's another, darker reason: fascination. We're compelled by the idea that ordinary people, neighbors, co-workers, family members, can harbor unthinkable secrets. It forces us to confront the fragile line between normalcy and monstrosity. Consider the crowds that gathered outside Ted Bundy's Florida execution in 1989. People cheered. They held signs. They celebrated his death like a sporting event. Why? Was it justice, or bloodlust? Look at the modern true crime boom, documentaries trending on streaming platforms, podcasts ranking at the top of the charts, reenactments, interviews, even fan mail sent to convicted killers. We don't just consume these stories, we feed them. And maybe that's what unsettles us most. Serial killers are extreme reflections of traits we all possess: anger, desire, curiosity, ego. We look at them and see what happens when those traits spiral out of control, unchecked by empathy or morality. We tell ourselves, I could never do that. But Bundy was once just a college student. Dahmer was once just a shy boy. Rader was once just a loving father and husband. So, how different are we, really? That thought lingers like a whisper in the dark. If monsters can look just like us, if they can hide in plain sight for years, if we can't always see them coming, then perhaps the scariest truth of all is this: we don't fear the darkness because it's far away. We fear it because, sometimes, it lives next door. And sometimes, it lives within.